These are the main products that would be required for joining membrane. Firstly, measure and mark the overlap to ensure you have a 100mm overlap. Once both sides are marked up, trim the rubber so that only 100mm is overlapping. Ensure that you cut a straight edge here, as this will be the visible edge once the join is completed. Mix the primer and pour this into a container so that it can be easily applied using the scrub pad. Next, cut small pieces of seam tape which will be used to tack back the upper or overlapping membrane. Carefully peel off the plastic so that the rubber can be tacked back out of the way ready for priming. Measure and mark 10mm beyond the overlapping rubber, which will indicate the area that needs to be primed. The final aim is to have 5 to 10mm of tape showing beyond the overlapped rubber. Then fold back the rubber using the seam tape to tack this down. Then apply primer to the top of the lower rubber right up to the marked line, not forgetting to also prime the upstand in this case. Then prime the underside of the upper or overlapping rubber. Wait approximately 5 minutes for the primer to flash off, checking to ensure it is not wet or stringy. Apply the seam tape to the primer, lining up the edge of the plastic with a chalk mark or edge of the primer as a guide. Pinch the seam tape into the change of angle to ensure a good bond, and use the penny roller to promote this bond further. Then trim the seam tape as required. Use the seam tape roller along the length of the seam tape and side to side to promote a secure bond for the seam tape into the primer. Use the penny roller into the change of angle. Peel away the plastic film at 45 degrees and then start to bond the overlapping rubber into the seam tape, pulling the film along the length and using your palm to push the rubber into the seam tape primer. When you reach the upstand, fold the rubber into the change of angle and use the penny roller to ensure a good bond at this point. Finally, use the seam tape roller and penny roller to ensure a good bond for the upper membrane into the seam tape by rolling along the length of the join, side to side and into the change of angle. Repeat the process on the other side of the roof by marking out the 100mm overlap and trimming the rubber. On this specific roof, we have a second upstand which will need to be bonded back with contact adhesive to allow the rubber join to take place. The contact adhesive will need to be applied to both the substrate and the underside of the rubber along the full length of the upstand. Allow approximately 5 minutes for the contact adhesive to flash off, and then push the rubber into the substrate, pinching into the change of angle to create the best bond. Use the penny roller to further promote this bond, and then pull the rubber up the upstand, starting in the middle where possible. Moving back to the join, cut small pieces of seam tape which will be used to tack back the upper or overlapping membrane. A small tip here, you can use the plastic film to stop the seam tape sticking to your scissors as much. Measure and mark 10mm beyond the overlapping rubber, which will indicate the area that needs to be primed, remembering to also mark up the upstand. You can also use a finger width to measure this if appropriate. Peel the plastic film off the seam tape and fold this back, ready to prime. Now prime the lower rubber up to the marked line. Remembering to also prime the upstands on each side. Then also prime the underside of the overlapping rubber. Allow around 5 minutes for the primer to flash off and trim off any excess rubber. Remember to use the penny roller to promote the seam tape into the changes of angle for the upstands. Trim the seam tape to suit and then use the seam tape roller to promote the bond between the primer and tape and the penny roller for a final time into the base of the upstands. Untack the upper rubber and allow this to fall onto the plastic film. This allows you to see if the seam tape is showing beyond the overlap. If you need to, you can trim the rubber to ensure the tape edge will show when bonded. There is an area that still requires bonding before the rubber can be joined. This also includes an external and internal corner. Make sure the rubber is lined up with the first upstand and using a template, mark up and then cut at 45 degrees to the upstand from the external corner. Apply contact adhesive to the last 100 mm leading into the upstands on both the substrate and underside of the rubber. Also apply to the internal corner. Wait for roughly 5 minutes to let the adhesive flash off, then check to ensure it's not stringy or wet. Roll the rubber up to the first upstand and pinch into the change of angle, then work the rubber around the external corner and up the next upstand using the penny roller at the change of angle. Now the seam tape join can be continued. Fold back the rubber and peel the plastic away at 45 degrees to the join. Carefully roll the overlapped rubber into the base of the upstand and use the penny roller to ensure a good bond in this detail. Work across the join, removing the film, and repeat this process on the other upstand. Use the seam tape roller and penny roller to ensure the overlapped rubber is bonded well to the seam tape. If there is any dust on the roof, this can be used to blend in the dark appearance of the seam tape.